It really is. I mean, it's hard to overstate how much of a crisis atmosphere there is over on this side of the Atlantic. Like, it really is a sort of nothing but the fallout of Charlie Kirk happening in the United States, and all other discussions are peripheral. Like, I really, if there's one thing I can impress upon you from being here versus there, it's that.
So we're all anticipating the arrival of Donald Trump. And I suppose, look, this always carries jeopardy because we just don't know what kind of mood Donald Trump will be in, whether he'll have kind words for Keir Starmer or whether he'll come up with something completely off script, unprompted, that takes us all by surprise. That, I suppose, is the joy and the horror of Donald Trump all in one. He's due to land at Stansted Airport. It's not our most glamorous airport. I don't know if you know Stansted, Zach, but we've not chosen.
I've flown out of there before.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's in Essex. It's a perfectly fine airport. It's full of normally of package holiday goers. As it's normally full of lots of families, Stansted. But anyway, Donald Trump arrives there. He won't have to go through customs or any of that, I'm sure. So he lands at 8:50, due to land at 8:50, and then he'll be taken to the US Embassy in central London. To gauge his mood, well, before takeoff, this is what he said about his upcoming trip. He sort of hinted that it could result in lower tariffs for the UK.
They're also on trade. They want to see if they can refine the trade deal a little bit. We made a deal, and it's a great deal. And I'm into helping them. Our country is doing very well. We've never done this well. We're having trillions of dollars coming because of the tariffs. They'd like to see if they could get a little bit better deal. So we'll talk to them.
There we go. The Times, though, this evening, Zach, is reporting that Keir Starmer has abandoned hopes of a Trump tariff deal. This is from our brilliant political editor, Stephen Swinford, and his team here and in Washington. So we understand that his quest to try and remove US tariffs from British steel and aluminium exports has been abandoned. Keir Starmer's abandoned hopes of securing that deal. The UK, the Times reports, has instead accepted a permanent 25% tariff on exports. This is after the US took a hardline stance in negotiations in recent days. Look, it's not as bad as the 50% on steel exports that other countries have to face, but it's not perhaps the win that Keir Starmer is after. That is what our political team is reporting. Is there any hint about what Donald Trump might offer or be offering to the UK over there?
To be honest, the American press is so laser focused on our domestic crisis right now that there's almost no attention going towards the Trump administration's approach to trade talks right now. It's remarkable how we are in the midst of a massive democratic crisis in the US, so it makes sense that there would be not so much attention. I'm actually a little bit surprised the president is going abroad right now, given the stakes of American politics.
But he wouldn't miss a historic second state visit, would he? Because this is something that no other US president has enjoyed.
No, but it really is. I mean, it's hard to overstate how much of a crisis atmosphere there is over on this side of the Atlantic. Like, it really is a sort of nothing but the fallout of Charlie Kirk happening in the United States, and all other discussions are peripheral. Like, I really, if there's one thing I can impress upon you from being here versus there, it's that. So I'm not, and I also honestly, like, even if it weren't for that informational environment, I would be telling you it is very hard to know what Trump is going to do when it comes to trade. The algorithms by which they determine which tariffs to put on which country are often opaque and confusing. The strategy seems much more haphazard than it is specifically tied to concrete trade goals. Oftentimes things seem determined by the president's whims and a lot of his advisors wanting to backfill him on various different things. So even if it weren't for the fact that there's just a severe attentional deficit in the US right now on anything not Kirk related, it's just very difficult to predict Trump's behavior in this particular sector.
Look, I wonder whether there might be a bit of time over there for the kind of pageantry that Donald Trump's going to experience whilst he is here. There's a massive state banquet tomorrow. There'll be speeches at that. There is going to be a huge military display at Windsor tomorrow. It's being touted as the largest military welcome on a ceremonial level that any leader in history has experienced here in the UK. That is the size of it. They're going to wow him effectively with a big show of military pomp and pageantry. There'll be a royal salute fired from the East Lawn of Windsor Castle. There's absolutely loads going on. There's going to be a guard of honour at Windsor Castle too. The president will inspect it, followed by a march past. There's lunch in the state dining room. There'll be stuff going on in the Green Drawing Room. St George's Chapel, a visit there to lay a wreath on the tomb of Queen Elizabeth. So I wonder whether when some of those pictures start to take hold, whether there will be a bit of curiosity about it, or do you think actually even then, no, Zack?
I suspect even then, no. I mean, I think one thing that we in the press habitually do is overestimate how much, at least in the US, how much the president's foreign trips, people care about them ordinarily. Sometimes there's a viral moment or something that really sticks out, or a speech that's really impressive. There's a lot of attention on Obama's Cairo speech back in 2009, for example. That was one of the very few foreign visits that really sticks out in my head as being especially notable. There was a J.D. Vance's speech about free speech in Europe recently, vice president, obviously, but because that speech broke new ideological ground or laid out a surprising, and I think counterintuitive position to many American audiences, I think that got a lot of attention. But it's not so much the pomp and circumstance that you're describing that captures the agenda or attention, right? It's whether or not what they're doing and saying constitutes a kind of new position for the administration, or changes the way that American foreign policy works, or something like that.
So this is my next question to you. Donald Trump's team travelling with him on Air Force One at the moment, about to land shortly at Stansted, they'll be well aware that this trip is not spiking into the hearts and minds of the American public. And yet this is a huge deal for Donald Trump. He can't stop talking about what a huge honour it is, how unprecedented this is. It basically means he's a big deal. Right? And anyone who decries Donald Trump to be a big deal should be celebrated. If his team are aware that this trip will not pierce the minds of the American public unless he does or says something unexpected, are we to expect that? Is this the way that Donald Trump lets the American public know where he is, what he's being treated to, by dropping a bombshell, by taking a position, as you say, or even saying something completely unexpected? This is how he puts it on the map.
That's possible, right? But I actually favor a simpler interpretation, which could turn out to be wrong, which is that Donald Trump is having a vacation. Right.
Oh,
he he loves the stuff like this. Now, from the UK government's point of view, it makes a lot of sense to do all the stuff that you're describing, right? Because the president loves being flattered. He loves getting to see all of these things. He loves being seen as the center of attention. He loves supervising military parades. In fact, I think it was a Bastille Day parade in Paris that convinced them that the US needed to have a military parade in Washington, which just so happened to happen on his birthday this year. I mean, you have to change the rules when you're thinking about Trump, right? This is not like a normal American president who's coming over to do a lot of policy work. I'm sure he loves the prospect of making deals, right? But a lot of what makes Trump's psyche tick is a sense of personal gratification and recognition, a sense that Donald Trump, is the big man who people are taking seriously and who people care about and who they're flattering. And so that's how you extract policy concessions from him. Like, it's smart. If I were the prime minister, I'd be doing all of the same things as your prime minister is doing right now. But the fact of the matter remains that, like, for Trump, it's not that he is doing the trip for, I think, any kind of key discernible policy thing, though I'm sure he's interested in being seen as the guy who makes great deals, as your clip excerpted. It's that he loves being celebrated. And he's being celebrated now.
And look, he absolutely loves the royal family. We've heard his comments about Charles and Camilla, calls them great friends. Even before he was king, he was my great friend, he said. So look, if he wants to illustrate to the American public just how important he is in the eyes not just of himself but of others, he'd be maybe mindful to make a few waves over here as a way of getting that across. Anyway, let's talk about Charlie Kirk, shall we? Who was sadly subject to that awful assassination last week. This evening, the Utah District Attorney Jeff Gray has given a press conference. It's happened in the last hour or so. It's confirmed that prosecutors will seek the death penalty for Tyler Robinson. He is the suspect, of course, of the murder of the conservative influencer Charlie Kirk.
Following the press conference, I am filing a notice of intent to seek the death penalty. I do not take this decision lightly, and it is a decision I have made independently as county attorney, based solely on the available evidence and circumstances and nature of the crime. Because we are seeking the death penalty, the defendant will continue to be held without bail in the Utah County Jail.
That was Utah District Attorney Jeff Gray. Now, the suspect, Tyler Robinson, the Utah District Attorney Jeff Gray has been accused in some circles of not being sort of hard line enough on his approach to the assassination of Charlie Kirk, hasn't he?
I mean, right now, I think the focus is less on the prosecution effort, except for the sort of bungling of Cash Patel, which I imagine we'll talk a little bit more about later, than it is about the way in which this is turning into a question of whether the entire American government is hard enough on what the Trump administration is calling the radical left, but what they actually refer to as, what they actually mean by that, is like a sort of vast swath of center to left-wing NGOs and even elements of the Democratic Party themselves. Right. So the prosecution, it's surprising, right? You say is seen as not being hard enough, and that may be true in some circles. But if you look at the tenor of what both the American right and left are talking about, right, the actual details of the legal case, the nature of the prosecution are getting much less attention than the ideological stakes surrounding it. That's what's consumed. When I talked earlier about, what's consuming the United States, it's that. It is the ideological recriminations and discussions of the implications for free speech and political association. That's really what's defining the American conversation now.
Okay, let's talk about Kash Patel then just briefly. The FBI director has been questioned by Democratic senators during an oversight hearing amid mounting criticism over his role in the agency's investigation into the assassination of Charlie Kirk and the handling of the Epstein files. Patel lost his temper when the senator and barrister Adam Schiff asked about the movement of the convicted sex offender Ghislaine Maxwell from a lower category prison.
I think the American people believe the truth, that I'm not in the weeds on the everyday movements of inmates. What I am doing is protecting this country, providing historic reform, and combating the weaponization of intelligence by the likes of you. And we have countlessly proven you to be a liar in Russiagate, in January 6th. You are the biggest fraud to ever sit in the United States Senate. You are a disgrace to this institution and an utter coward.
I'm not surprised.
I'm not surprised that you continue to lie from your perch and put on a show so you can go raise money for your charade. You are a political buffoon at best.
Wow, strong words. I should just clarify, it was the movement to a lower category prison, not from one, of Ghislaine Maxwell. But kind of put that aside, we can sort of hear what you're talking about there, Zack, when we talk about things being at fever pitch and intense focus, really, on free speech and what is happening at the moment in American politics.
Yeah, I mean, Kash Patel, I earlier this year before he was confirmed, I spent a long time listening to his podcast episodes. And I mean, that's really at his heart what he is, right? Kash Patel is a guy who has worked in Republican politics and worked on policy related to intelligence behind the scene, but he wasn't an FBI agent. He's a career conservative influencer, right? Right-wing, not just like conservative, like sort of fairly right-wing.
I've interviewed him on this station, actually,
Yeah, so you get it, right? Yeah. Like he's a pretty wild guy. And that, seeing him in that role, you don't see scenes like that on the U.S. Senate floor. That's not the way that it goes, that witnesses speak to senators or senators speak to witnesses. It all speaks to not just, I think, Patel's personal unfitness for the job, though that's part of the story, but it's also a general coarsening of the American political debate, right? I'm not one of those people that thinks everything was better in the past. I actually think most things are better now than they were in the past. But one thing that really has been degraded in the Trump era of American politics particularly is the norm around treating political opponents respectfully and as shared citizens in a democratic project.
Yeah,
right?
We will need to wrap it up there, sadly, for time, Zack. But look, I mean, illustrated there by Kash Patel, and you're right to make that point. Thank you for being with us. Always appreciated. That is Zack Beauchamp, senior correspondent at Vox. Cheers. Good to speak to you, Zack. Thank you.